Oh, we're starting. Okay.
Good evening. We have a little light crowd tonight. I'd like to welcome you here and to welcome those who are online. Welcome to our 7th edition of Northminster Presents, an activity that's being sponsored by the Men's Prayer and Study Group that we started just a little over a year ago. And tonight's we're going to delve into the world of climate change. I'd like to mention first that we were able to secure this wonderful speaker here this evening through one of our own congregants, one Emily Plunkett, who is herself deeply involved in the Hoosier Environmental Council, which is a body that takes on all aspects of everything from legislature, water issues, social justice issues that are surround the environment, anything and everything. So thank you for bringing this lead to us, Emily. And I'm very, very proud to introduce to you Delaney Barber. Delaney is in charge of outreach, energy, and climate coordinator, which is a lot. I think she spends a fair amount of time chasing legislatures down in the State House, trying to get them to think in terms of green. She originally got her BS degree in anthropology from Purdue University, and later went on to Indiana University, where she got her master's in public affairs, which is a very tough organization to get involved with. And it's nice to know that we have good, strong people leading in public affairs. I'm sure that she will fill us in much more about the Environmental Council. I don't want to overstep my reach in that and leave that to her. So with all that said, let's welcome Delaney.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here tonight. I've heard such good things from Emily about this congregation and the community you have here. So I'm going to start talking about climate change. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Delaney Barber. I'm the Outreach, Energy, and Climate Coordinator at Hoosier Environmental Council. Also originally from West Lafayette, Indiana, and a Purdue and IU grad. Let's see, next slide. Oh. Okay. Is there a clicker?
Please be helpful.
Yes. And then, okay. There we go. Okay, we're all good. Yes, so an introduction, a little bit more about HEC's mission. So we are the voice of the people for the environment in Indiana. The organization with the passion and the plan to tackle our environmental challenges and help make our state a healthier, better place to live and do business. So our work, our main areas of focus are sustainable economy, which has to do with climate change, energy, transportation, some of the stuff I'll talk about today. But in addition to that, we also have environmental health and justice initiatives. Our environmental justice, specifically in Indianapolis, has grown, thanks to Paula Brooks and Dr. Indra Frank. And then we also have and work on coal ash cleanup, and we monitor large feeding operations and agriculture operations. And then we also do water and wilderness protection, expanding conservation funding, trails, and greenways. And all of that also ties into climate change. And how we do it is with policy, outreach, and accountability. With policy, we advocate at the State House. We're a resource for Hoosiers, and we also provide technical assistance to our representatives and senators at the State House talking about these important issues. In our outreach, we engage, educate, and activate Hoosiers with events like this, and our annual Greening the State House conference, where we focus on a handful of environmental issues. And then lastly, accountability by holding developers, businesses, agriculture professionals, and the government accountable when they don't uphold regulations. So, brief overview of the agenda. I will dive into some scientific evidence and a historical perspective of climate change, very briefly kind of looking at global impacts and emissions going down to the US and really focusing on what's happening here in Indiana with our causes. And then I'll move on to changes, so contributing factors to climate change, and then impacts to Indiana, as well as solutions and calls to actions that you can do right after this event. And there'll be mini breaks in between each of these big topics if we want to circle back, if there's questions and you want to dig deeper, because there's a lot of information to cover on this topic, and we're just really looking at this big overview. So first, I'm going to define some units of measurement that are seen a lot in here, and is usually seen throughout any articles, news sources that you're going to see talking about climate change and talking about emissions. They are measured in million metric tons because there's so many. And also people will use metric tons as well. A lot of people talk about 1.5 degrees Celsius increase, but what does that really mean? That's about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit on average. Energy is usually measured within the British thermal unit, which is a kind of a complicated way to say how much heat is required to raise the temperature of water, and that kind of levels the playing field for any chemical if you're always comparing it to water. GHG is the abbreviation for greenhouse gases. You'll also hear the word mitigation a lot with climate change, and that's just reducing the causes and the contributing factors, while adaptation is adjusting to the changes that are already going to take place and already have taken place. And then you'll also hear CO2e, which is carbon dioxide equivalent, And this is because we have a bunch of different greenhouse gases, and the most prevalent being carbon dioxide. So we make that just equivalent in their heat trapping abilities and how long they stay in the atmosphere. So it's all equal when we're comparing data. Okay. So let's see if this plays. I'll walk to it. Oh, it's going to, okay. So the text is kind of small, but what you're looking at is a comparison of our carbon budget, so the amount of carbon in our atmosphere, with starting from 1895 all the way to 2020. You have our carbon dioxide concentration, and then our global mean temperature and our overall carbon budget. So how much carbon are we allowed to emit before we see a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase and a 2 degrees Celsius increase? And that correlates directly with human expansion and development, inventions, transportation, industry, directly correlates with those trends. Yep. Okay. Okay, I don't have to use that video. That was a backup one with the same thing. So, broadly looking at our US emissions, we emit out of our mixture, 79% of that is carbon dioxide. Then we see methane at 11%, which is a lot from agriculture and their waste products. Then you have nitrous oxide, and that's usually coming from industry. And then you have fluorinated gases, which can be from refrigerants and other sources like those. Our biggest sector is transportation in the US. Then it goes to electricity generation, industry, agriculture, commercial use, and then residential. So us today, heating our homes, powering our homes, actually don't make up that much of our greenhouse gas emissions in the US. It's coming from other sources. And if we look directly at Indiana's emissions, we compared these to our Midwestern neighbors, and you'll see some gross totals here. So big numbers like 210 million metric tons of CO2, minus 5.5 in land use, which I'll define later and what that means. But when you look at just per person emissions for our population of the different states, Indiana is the second worst emitter per capita. And that's coming from our electric power industry. So generating power, not only for us, but for others. Then industry, then transportation, which is a little bit different than the overall US emissions. Residential making up only 4.6% of that. Okay, so now I'm going to go into these major contributors and carbon sinks. So these are what contribute to our emissions. First being power generation. So Indiana is the 8th largest producer of coal in the nation. And compared to natural gas, which we actually consume the most of, so we're importing that from elsewhere. And you can see non-combustible renewables, it's growing. Indiana actually has a huge solar power potential and industry growth as long as people allow that growth to happen. And then industry and manufacturing, major emitters are listed on the EPA website, so you can actually see which factories produce the most. They have to report that to the EPA. And then transportation, a lot of those are coming from personal vehicles, so people driving in their car, So CO2 emissions from 1 gallon of gasoline is about 9,000 grams of CO2 per gallon, which if you look at the average vehicle per year is emitting 4.6 metric tons of CO2 per year. I think that's about 10,000 miles traveled. Some people travel more, less. But that's what we're personally emitting. And then agriculture. So there's a way and data to look at greenhouse gas emissions per pound of whatever protein you want to look at. So that's including water, transportation, processing, feeding, whole life to death of that animal. And beef is one of the worst emitters, mainly because they're producing a lot of methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas. And Americans eat a lot of beef. We eat, on average, 56.2 pounds per year, and that's from the USDA. And they break down each protein source and how much makes it to the market, which is 12.7 metric tons of CO2 per person. And then cheese is actually more than farmed fish, poultry, eggs, peas. So there's other protein sources that don't emit as much greenhouse gases. And sinks. It's what we love. Indiana forests hold 5.5 million metric tons of CO2 per year. So that's subtracting from our gross total. It's keeping that from going into the atmosphere. And the U.S. forests hold 886 million metric tons of CO2, which is 16% of our emissions, and equal to 50 million vehicles on the road. So we need to protect our carbon sinks. Mini break. So that was a lot of data and greenhouse gas emissions. We'll go more into impacts of these emissions, but if anybody had any questions or wanted to circle back, yes?
About 10 years ago, I stopped eating meat and pork for just this reason that probably much increased my consumption of organic dairy products to replace that protein. Was that a wise decision from this standpoint, or am I kidding myself?
Oh, yes. There was a question about switching out beef and then relying on other protein sources like milk or cheese, other dairy products to replace that. Since overall those are less emissions than eating beef, yes, you're at a net positive. And now there's so many options out there. Not all are created equal, but so many different options that you can partake in. And of course, we'll see in the impacts, this also means holding people accountable because we can't do it all, and we shouldn't feel like we can do it all, but making personal decisions influences what options are available, what we can purchase, what we can see in the grocery store, just with personal choices. Yes. Oh. Which was worse? So Kentucky was 1 million metric ton worse than us. So we were a close second. If you expand that to the Midwest in general, including Iowa, Iowa's actually the worst because of their agriculture industry compared to their small population. I didn't look at per capita emissions for the US, but overall, Indiana, I believe, is in the top 10. But that is also on our website, so you can fact check me on that. Yes?
In terms of environmental impact, which is worse to produce, is a unit of CO2 or a unit of methane?
Unit of methane is worse because it has a higher heat potential, but it doesn't stay in the atmosphere for as long. So I guess if you're looking for a bang for your buck in short term, you'll try to reduce your methane. But but overall CO2 stays in the atmosphere far longer than methane does. All right, we're getting into, okay, impacts. So global climate change impacts, I know it's really important to localize and think like, what are we actually going to see in Indiana? What am I going to see in my backyard? But that doesn't negate the global climate change impacts that will affect us, as we saw with supply chain issues already when there was a global pandemic. So we're going to feel these impacts one way or another, but it might not just be in our weather or temperature in Indiana. It's going to be our quality of life, our way of life. Because these drivers of climate change being greenhouse gas emissions, you're going to see the temperature rise. You're going to see more extreme weather. You're going to see melting ice because global average temperature has increased, which means that ice isn't soaking in some of that heat because now there's less of it, which just cascades over and over into sea level rise. And the ocean pH is going up because there's so much CO2 in it, which really just changing that a little bit in our ocean causes, our fish and food sources, as well as our biodiversity, lost. And then that just radiates into the impacts that we see. So flooding, food insecurity, there'll be more mosquitoes and pests because there aren't as much cold time for them to die off before coming back. Heat stress, water supply risk, those are all impacts that we'll see globally because of just this driver of climate change. Then in Indiana specifically, we've already warmed 1.2 degrees Fahrenheit over the last century, and we're projected to rise another 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050. And all of that you can see from, 1895, Industrial Revolution, to now. And globally, our emissions just keep climbing. Oh, is that a question? Yes. How do you check temperature data? So actually, you can look at Arctic ice, and you can actually see greenhouse gases melted in the ice, as well as the melting and freezing of that to see what the temperature was way back, however long you want to go for. That's where we get a lot of our historic data when we weren't specifically measuring it ourselves. Yeah. So, hottest temperature. So the average temperature, maybe we won't feel as much, but we'll also see like hot temperature days exceeding maximums that we haven't seen before. And when that happens, we need to have the proper infrastructure to cool ourselves down. So your increases in maximum temperature will require more cooling infrastructure and to make sure that we're not increasing preventable heat deaths. These are entirely preventable deaths, and as you can see with the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment, which was produced by Purdue University, 2020, 2050s to 2080s, 111 degrees. And these differences, the medium emissions scenario is in orange, high emissions is kind of like business as usual, we don't do anything, in the red. And then increased extreme heat days. So these are any days that are over 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're projected to increase 40 to 50% of those days across Indiana. So out of all the days in the year, you might see 41 to 43 of these very high temperature days. And then by 2080, across Indiana, north, central, and south, you're going to see close to maybe 100 in the south of Indiana. So that increases cooling demand. And You'll hear annual number of cooling degree days, and this is a statistic that's calculated anytime the temperature is higher than 65 degrees. This is what utilities use to estimate how many people are turning on their AC units. So you're increasing your energy need at different times, and then you're taking that mean temperature and adding it together. So that's how they get all these statistics, is taking all the days higher than 65 and finding that average. So across South, Central, and North Indiana, you're going to see this increase. Okay. Increased annual rainfall. So southern and west central regions will witness the most increase, and it is also projected that rain will replace snow in Indiana around 2050. We might not see any snow days by 2080. So if I have a kid right now, they're going to graduate in 2041, which means they're going to be seeing this, and their kids are going to be seeing this. And the frequency of extreme rainfall events. So we have increased annual rainfall, but it's not all falling evenly in perfect little increments. It's increased annual rainfall, extreme rainfall events, leading to flooding, contributing to soil erosion, as well as overwhelming our wastewater systems, and that's going to require more money and more flood infrastructure upgrades to just handle the amount of extreme rainfall we're going to see. Also impacting our farmers. We will see an extended growing season. However, paired with increased rainfall and extreme events plus temperature, we're going to see a lot of high stress on our prime crops like corn, soybeans, and wheat. It's not used to being grown under those conditions. And with changing growth cycles, migratory birds that rely on like dropped wheat and temperature changes to migrate down will be stressed as well, losing biodiversity with this difference in growing season. And plant hardiness is also a word thrown around. So in the southern tip of Indiana, they expect it to feel like northern Alabama by the late century. So plant hardiness will have to be a lot higher, probably leading to more money for genetic engineering of plants to withstand drought and flooding, and less than prime soil, fertile soil. So all of those impacts are tied to a social cost. They try to estimate how much this will cost taxpayers and average individuals making home improvements or preparing for these changes. Right now, the EPA calculates $42 per ton of CO2, but that's in 2007 dollars, and they're actually preparing to upgrade these because it's not including equity for future generations. How the statistic looks at the cost of carbon is, I care about $10 now instead of $50 later. Which they're saying, we know we need to think about it as these impacts mean the same to us now as they do in the future. So Indiana's social cost is $8.8 billion with the emissions from 2019. So, and all the policymakers use this at the federal, state, and local level. Okay, another mini break for questions.
What you were describing to us is cascading levels of temperatures go up, more flooding, more stress on the crops, harvest, so on. Recently, there's been a lot in the news about this thing called sixth extinction event.
Yes.
Is that what we're looking at here? Is that a part
Yes. So, I mean, we've seen more threatened and extinct species over the last century, and that's just with some of the changes that happened over the last century. Now we're seeing even more of an acceleration. So that's going to continue to stress out migratory species, native species, coupled with the fact that we're still developing, we're still growing, we're still getting rid of these natural spaces at a rate that we're not replacing them with. Yes.
Is this on? Yeah, you had a slide before about snow being replaced by rainfall by 2050, and then you talked about kind of a total replacement, it sounded like by 2080. What does 2050 mean that rainfall will replace snow? Not completely, apparently.
So still in northern Indiana, they might see some snow, but most of southern and central Indiana might see a couple snow days.
So almost no snow by 2050
no snow,
around here.
Yeah. With that increased growing season, there's less frost days. There's a smaller dormant period during the winter. Yeah, wetter springs, wetter falls, shorter winters.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yeah, speak into it if you can.
Oh, well, you heard what I said. Okay. You heard what I asked or said about Carrie Hamilton. I'm a proud constituent. On a local level, can you explain to us, you know what the big dig is or the tunnel or whatever it is that's going on locally, that's been going on forever underneath Indianapolis, you know, where the wastewater is allegedly going to be stored? Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think the person that I would refer to is Indra Frank. She does water policy, as well as probably the Indianapolis Office of Sustainability. They're very responsive. I cannot speak to that personally as much, probably just as much as you know, but we do know that Indianapolis, greater Indianapolis, has outdated flood infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure that needs to be replaced and updated. So, yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. So how much more time, or how much less time does methane spend in the atmosphere, and how more powerful is it than CO2? I don't know the multiplication factor off the top of my head, but I know it stays in the atmosphere for around 9 to 10 years, as a lot shorter half-life. CO2's 300 to 1,000 years is the current estimate. But I can double check that and circle back at the end of the presentation to get that multiplier. I believe it's definitely more than 10 times. Oh, I didn't know there was an animation in that. Okay, so the current landscape of addressing climate change in the U.S. So I'm going to go through something some of you may have heard about, the Inflation Reduction Act. This was the largest and most significant legislation to fight climate change ever at the federal level. With implementing properly, it should put us back on track to our previous commitments within the Paris Agreement and our international commitments. The Blue-Green Alliance projects the creation of 9 million jobs from this legislation, which includes manufacturing, installation, support staff of different energy, clean energy, home improvements, efficiency improvements, building code updates, all of this including domestic solar arrays and battery factories and things like that. And this aims to overall lower energy costs, build a clean energy economy in the US, reduce pollution, support farmers as well, because there's separate incentives for rural access development and making changes to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And then addressing environmental disparities, so the people that will be impacted the most, trying to get them the resources and spread resources equally. I have a handout on this as well. It's also available on our website because it's a lot of information. But we looked through the Inflation Reduction Act for what consumer incentives you can actually look into now or financially plan for with this act. They re-upped the electrical vehicle tax credit program, but this is a non-refundable tax credit, so you got to owe the government some money to get any money back. And not everyone can do that. And there's certain manufacturing requirements as well with that new vehicle tax credit, like where you're sourcing your battery materials and what where it's assembled in North America. So there's some cars that count and some cars that don't. And then there's an up to $4,000 tax credit for used EVs. So that's 30%, up to 30% of the cost, which is $4,000. There's no manufacturing requirements for used. It must be 2 years older than the current calendar date that you purchase the vehicle, and this one is non-refundable in one time. So if you sell the car, the next person can't get the tax credit again. But financially planning, there plans to be a program by 2024 where the government will work with dealerships so that tax credit can be transferable to them and they can deal with it, and then you can get off market value sticker price off your car. So that's something to look forward to. And then there's also income limits to these tax credits, as well as EV price limits. So single taxpayer, heads of household, and joint filers all have different requirements for used and new cars. But the IRS has also updated this on the website. So if you look up IRS Inflation Reduction Act, it should give you all the codes and help you file your taxes if you take advantage of these. And then the price limits being $55,000 for sedans, SUVs and trucks $80,000, used cars up to $25,000. Paired with that is EV charging money, so creating a network across the US and being dispersed to states to increase their EV infrastructure. So they also have a EV charger tax credit extension. So if you get an EV and you install a charger in your house, you can get 30% of the total cost, or up to $1,000 off that charger. And then parts and labor costs of these chargers usually range from $500 to $2,000, so you should be able to get a decent amount off of purchasing that charger in one time and non-refundable. And then clean energy, the clean energy tax credit, this includes the complete system. So installation, fees, buying the solar panels. If you are able to have rooftop solar, you can take advantage of this. It's solar, wind, and geothermal systems. There's no price cap, and it's refundable and transferable. So it's supposed to have a program where, again, you could transfer that credit to a solar developer, and you could get that off of your upfront cost. Home efficiency, another tax credit as well. There's more details on what you get for each appliance, like AC units, insulation, window improvements. And then you can get $150 for home energy audits. These are currently free from Duke, AES, Jackson County, RAMC, NIPSCO. If you're a renter, check with your landlord first. Some free assessments will not apply if you're a renter. These are non-refundable, but are also supposed to apply to homeowners, renters, multifamily homes. And what's really exciting is the rebate program that is coming soon. And this looks at, one is the homes rebate program, which doesn't have any income limits requirements. And same thing as the tax credits, is 30% of the cost, or $1,200 for an AC unit. The High Efficiency Electric Home Rebate Act is for only low and middle income households, including multifamily homes also apply. If you're low income and qualify, you could get 100% of project costs and installation up to $14,000 covered. And then they kind of break down, like a heat pump, $8,000, heat pump and water heater, $1,700. So point of sale rebates, again, sticker price off. So hopefully making it more equitable for people to participate and also make their home more efficient and better heated and cooled for these climate change impacts. And then also in Indiana, we've already seen this happen. From the bipartisan infrastructure law, we received funding for an electric vehicle charging infrastructure, which INDOT invested $100 million in EV chargers across the state. This isn't complete. There should be more money coming as well for more EV chargers and locations that they didn't get to put in the first round of funding. They did accept public comments. Not all were taken, but they plan to grow this and then have locations across Indiana, urban, rural, disadvantaged communities. And then there's $550 million for community-based clean energy made available by this law, and it will help state, local, and tribal governments with community-based clean energy, which is one of the initiatives of Hoosier Environmental Council. States can apply for this funding, and it should go to local governments. Applications are supposed to open this month. And it's to build capacity, transportation programs, community solar, EV infrastructure. Community solar is small solar arrays, maybe on a shared rooftop, public space, brownfield, unused spaces like that, and you subscribe to that small solar array. So you see that on your electric bill. But currently, Indiana does not allow third-party developers to make those projects. Only the utilities can, and they're not doing it. And community solar just makes it more equitable for anyone who can't afford or put rooftop solar on their roof for various reasons. And then last, to tie it up, since climate change is so interconnected, we have this idea of resiliency. So we need to mitigate climate change by reducing greenhouse gases, but we also need to adapt to what's already going on and going to take place. Indiana resiliency includes things that are not just environmental. It's investing in public health, having more hospitals, healthcare centers, cooling centers, protecting and preserving wetlands and natural spaces that we have to sequester carbon, emergency planning, so when floods happen, how are we going to respond as a state, as a local government, and then also increasing distributed generation, which is thrown around a lot, but solar and wind. So if you're doing community solar or rooftop solar, you're adding resiliency and reliability to the grid, because if there's a blackout, that is still running. So that can still supply energy to you, to your neighbors, to your community, and there's less efficiency loss when you partake in distributed generation. So We need to have a variety of resources, excess capacity for when things go wrong, and make sure that all of those resources are spread equally and fairly among everyone. Okay, another mini break. The last section is shorter. Yes. Oh, sorry.
So we looked at putting in solar, and they said we'd have to cut down a tree to do it. Are there other options? Like, are there personal wind options or home wind options? Or, you know, I'm hesitant to cut down a really big
tree.
Because that is important to me in the environment as well. So, you know, I think we're still, like, some of us are still struggling with how do you actually do this stuff.
Yes. So another reason why we're fighting for community solar is there's so many reasons that rooftop solar just doesn't work for everyone. It's a big investment. There's contracts. Your roof isn't suitable for it. And I would say don't cut down the tree because there are solutions out there. We should be allowed to do them. We need to hold our government bodies accountable because there's solutions that are accessible, are economically feasible. We're seeing them being implemented in other states. And there's many reasons why your neighbors would also want to partake in something like that as well. Not everyone needs a rooftop solar array. And I haven't seen personal wind. I'm guessing that applies to people that may have like rural or lots of acreage that could do smaller wind production, probably not in Indianapolis jurisdiction. But yeah, I wouldn't cut down the tree. That's a valuable resource. Yeah.
All of those programs you were just describing, is that all from the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yes, except for the last slide, that was the bipartisan infrastructure law, but yeah, all of that was from the Inflation Reduction Act, so it's supposed to also fight inflation. There's also some other things in that act, I think for Medicaid and Medicare benefits, expanding that as well, so there's a lot of things in that act that also just increase resilience for climate change.
I have two real quick questions
Yes.
for you that I think might be of interest to everyone here. I have never heard or received data on how much do you reduce the impact on the environment by switching from a gasoline car to an electric car. We know that electric cars do have a carbon print because you're buying the electricity from a coal-fired southern Indiana power plant. There's something to it. But as a general rule, how much help does it give our environment if we buy an electric car?
So if we don't just look at emissions, which we never should, cars, you're not just, because you are emitting from your car, which is less efficient than the grid, and plugging it into either coal, natural gas, or renewable energy, whatever the energy mix is. When you have cars driving around, especially like that, you're getting a lot more air pollution as well, which only exacerbates all of these impacts and causes that we're seeing. So technically, I think right now in Indiana with the current energy mix, a hybrid is better. But with what we're projected to see with renewable growth, if you're going to buy a car, best to switch to an EV now instead of hybrid, wait 10 years, then get an EV, because you're also reducing pollution around your community.
So it's fair to assume that if transportation on one of your earliest charts is one of the biggest contributors to climate change, and that the reduction from going to a gasoline car is has a significant lowering of emissions, then it's an extremely intelligent thing for us to do.
Yes. Across the U.S., especially on the East Coast, you see a lot of their emissions be the highest in transportation, which can also be fought not just with EVs, but public transit, more complete streets that are pedestrian friendly and bike friendly. So alternative ways of transporting around would also heavily impact those emissions. And then those portions of the emissions that are coming from like freight trucks, they're getting to a point where they can have that as an EV. I don't think it's as feasible yet compared to a diesel. But most of those transportation emissions are coming from everyone just driving around by themselves, not using alternative transport and burning gasoline.
The second part of that question, I think, is something in this room that everyone has had asked of them at one time. I have asked myself, should I buy an electric vehicle car? And people tell me, no, you should wait 5 or 6 years because the technology is going to get a lot better. What would you say about that type of thing?
If your car is on its last leg and you need a new car, hybrid or electric vehicle, especially I think in 2023, there's going to be a lot more options with very good range at the $30,000, $40,000 level. But again, with upgrading all of these things, it's also best if you don't need to upgrade. It's actually worse for the environment if you're like getting the best new thing on the market and switching all the time. That's just more resources, more emissions. So if you have to buy a new car, you would think about an EV or a hybrid. If you don't, wait. Yeah. Yes.
Side comment, I have a plug-in hybrid that replaced a total car, and I love it. But my question is about solar, and maybe you'll talk about this later. Like, what are the chances that Indiana's net metering that expires in 10 years is going to go away? And is this, like, seen in other states? Because I feel like my parents who live in Michigan, that's not a thing. And so it's really just a bummer that, like, that's an inhibition for, like, putting solar on, because you barely get cost neutral if you only have 10 years, and now every day it's less.
Yes. So sadly, the Indiana Supreme Court did decide in favor of the utilities for instantaneous netting, I think last week. But I think it's too late this session to do anything about it, but we have lots of partners, including HEC, that are going to continue to fight for bringing back net metering. And yes, we're one of the only states that had net metering and then took it away, and something that we have to continue to fight. But we're fighting in other ways as well in the meantime. So we got some good people doing this work, and there seems to be more of a shift in the State House. Even saying the word climate change is not taboo anymore, which is growth. So, like before, I don't think people said global warming or said climate change, and now people across the aisle, no matter where they're from, are saying it, do believe that it's real. The kind of main problem is, how important is it really? How much are the impacts really going to happen? Should we value certain economics that are happening now with certain people that have a lot of power versus future generations? So, but yeah, we got a lot of people working on it. Okay. Yes.
Should we be putting in a charging station here at church?
Oh, the question was, should you put a charging station here at the church? If you can, yes. So these public infrastructure is only going to make it better. Obviously, with community solar being an issue, there have been some places that still have put solar on top of their building to then charge their own EV charger. There's a library, I think in Brownsburg, that did this as well. They put solar panels on top of the roof to actually feed into this public EV charger. And Purdue University also has EV chargers in their parking garages as well. So it's, yes, if you can increase that personally, awesome. Yes.
Are there incentives for us as a large physical plant to do something like that, where we might get some kind of benefit from becoming a community center for car charging? Or that's not a reason not to do it. It's just,
yes.
Yeah.
So I will also look at the tax requirements for the EV charging incentives. I don't think you just have to be a personal individual or household, because there's also different tax incentives that aren't just consumer-based. It's for local governments and communities to use. So depending on your tax filing status, those can apply differently. And I can also triple check that question with Lawyers for Good Government, and they legally fact check me on that, besides all the guides that are out there now. But yes, I can find that for sure.
So my recollection is that I think it's the Cincinnati Zoo actually has their whole parking lot covered with solar panels, which is kind of cool because you're parking in the shade.
Yeah.
And you're generating solar. I haven't seen like options to, we have space to use. Are there options like that? And is Indiana like helping support movement toward that type of structure or whatever?
Maybe not at the state level, but there's a lot of city governments, which somewhat are on this slide, that are doing what they're allowed to do and can to do things like that that are feasible. I'm not sure how feasible the parking lot solution is, because usually projects like that are also externally funded. So someone supporting the zoo gave them the ability to do that instead of just Kroger putting in a parking lot like that. But the city of Bloomington, the city of Indianapolis, try to push the limit of sustainability constantly in their communities. So we're seeing that, and we're still seeing, for instance, the solar energy market in Indiana being top ranked for growth in the next 20 to 30 years, even though we got rid of net metering. Dropped us down a bit, but we're, I think, still in the top 10. We were 6th. So there's initiatives like that happening, maybe just not at the state level. Yeah. Okay. So what are other people saying in Indiana? There was an open letter to Duke and AES in December that asked specifically for more renewable energy, because also community solar is not an option, by Cummins, Coca-Cola, the city of Indianapolis, the city of Bloomington, Rivian, Roche, Salesforce, and Walmart, and also citing that it'll bring even more jobs and industry like that if they can also meet their goals at reducing emissions, and they realize that a lot of that is from their electricity use. And since they don't have the power to change that themselves, they're asking Duke and AES for more options. So there's other groups as well, like the Indiana Agricultural Coalition for Renewable Energy. There's farmers working together to do carbon credits for good soil health using cover crops, having these extra benefits including better water quality and mitigating and adapting to climate change impacts. There's the Indiana Conservative Alliance for Energy. So on both sides of the aisle, people care about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's also the youth in the state, which I love this group, Confront the Climate Crisis. They continue to fight for a climate task force and the recognition of climate change at the state level and in all of their communities at high schools around the state. And the McKinney Climate Fellow Program, this is run through IU. I was also a 2-time fellow of this program, trying to keep sustainability professionals here while also adding capacity to organizations, businesses, governments that care about this work. HEC is also a participant this year again. Solar United Neighbors, another great group. Cummins, Pacers Sports, the City of Carmel, and the City of Indianapolis are all participants this year. They usually match, I think, close to 35 to 40 students over the summer, full-time, doing sustainability work. And then over this length of the program, they've already had over 100 businesses, nonprofits, and local governments who have participated. So we're seeing this happen. We're seeing people make climate action plans, doing greenhouse gas inventories, seeing how they can increase sustainability in their business models, decoupling from growth with carbon emissions to growth without carbon emissions. So we're doing some good work in Indiana, and there's a lot of people that are passionate about this and are staying here and doing the work, so that we can also see it throughout the state and at all levels of governance. And making your impact, another positive. So we've seen the Inflation Reduction Act as the US level also impacting consumers and states being able to make an impact like never before. But the 2023 Indiana General Assembly started on Monday, and HEC is already fighting for a lot of different priorities, but one of them being conservation funding, keeping our natural spaces, expanding our natural spaces to not only be a carbon sink, but quality of life, keeping people here, bringing people here, having something to do with your families. And we're working on that. It was in the governor's State of the State address. So the governor has made it a priority, and we're going to continue to make it a priority throughout the session, as well as wetlands protections. We've already lost a lot of our wetlands, which is another good sink, biodiversity, creating resiliency for us, and Climate Solutions Task Force. That is another priority, teaming up with Confront the Climate Crisis, saying climate change is a thing, also looking at studying a climate action plan, ways to have carbon credit systems for farmers to participate in, and things like that, as well as clean energy, community solar, anything that prohibits clean energy. We're opposed to that. And yes, fusion. Well, I am personally very excited about fusion. I remember learning about it as, oh, this is nuclear fission. Fusion's never going to happen. And we figured it out. So this is amazing. Pretty far away from actually implementing that to like having gasoline without the motor of your car. Can't run it. But again, a zero emissions, especially if you're powering those lasers that they did fusion with renewable energy. You're looking at powering cities, our country. Yeah, that's very exciting. There's also active days that you can be at the State House. If you can't be that day, that's okay. But Conservation Day is January 24th. This is also on our website as well, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., where organizers will be at the State House helping you prepare to meet with your legislators and schedule meetings with them to talk about conservation funding and why it's important to you. as well as Renewable Energy Day. Later that week on January 26th from 9 to 3, there will be tabling, and then speakers as well, and then later in the afternoon, they set you off to go meet with your legislators. And then Confront the Climate Crisis is doing their Youth Act Now event on February 1st from 11 to 1. They'll also have some speakers and urge you to speak with your legislators about climate change. And then attend Third House meetings, which is a fancy word for meet your legislator events. Some of these are free, some of them are hosted by chambers of commerce, so they have a fee for entry or to cover the cost of the event. We have a lot of these listed on our website, but you can also find them elsewhere if you're looking for a specific legislator. And I think around this area is Ed Delaney, which for conservation funding, it's making its way to Ways and Means, and Ed Delaney is on the Ways and Means committee, so you can contact him or email him that you support conservation funding for climate change, for its beauty and biodiversity, different ways that you can make an impact. So soon, focus on the committees. If your legislator's on it, if it's not, contact them about the different things that are happening. So follow us for calls to action. We'll do eco events, volunteer opportunities so you can get involved and help us reach out to people. And then just some daily actions, not that they have to be super big or impressive, but just discussing with others about climate change, about energy, about questions that you have, articles that you've read, discussing that with your community and others that maybe you don't talk to that much. Elevate other people's voices. If they said it well, say it louder. And also you have to make sure that you're filling your cup so you can fill other people's cup. So you can contact me here and I can take any additional questions as well. Yes.
You said that the term climate change is no longer verboten at the Indiana General Assembly. What facts have you found to be most effective in convincing the deniers that there might really be an issue to deal with?
Well, it's not just facts. Really what's powerful is your stories. So how, instead of just greenhouse gas emissions heat the earth, and I'm seeing an increase in average temperature, you can say, because of such and such thing, this has impacted me, or my family, my friends. This is what I want to see. This is what I care about for my kids, our grandkids, like conservation funding, a park that you like to go to. A lot of that state conservation funding will make its way to local projects. So anything that you can tie to of how that piece of legislation directly impacts you and the people around you is what really resonates. Yeah.
Well, folks, as usual, we're over on time. But that's wonderful. I would really, really like to thank you. I think we could stand here and talk to you for hours. I have millions of questions burning in my brain right now, and I'm sure folks out here too. I think your presentation was absolutely tremendous.
Thank you.
And we so appreciate it.
Thanks.
Perhaps, you know, as we're experiencing these Northminster Presents events, we're taking serious consideration about how we as a congregation can get more involved in those type of things. And I love the idea about putting electric things in our parking lots. I don't know if we'll do that or not, but it sounds great.
Yeah.
Know that the Men's Parents group is going to make a small contribution to donate to
Thank you.
the environmental group, so
Yeah.
that you have received that from us. So thank you very,
Thank
very much.
you. All right.
Just a couple things before we go. whoops, I left my notes down here. We, as you know, this is called the Men's Prayer and Study Group. So we like to do a prayer, and I will keep it short, but we definitely need to do that. But I wanted to tell you about the next upcoming event, which is on, I believe it's February the 8th. And yes, it's a Carrie Beth Mathias. She is a licensed mental health counselor, and she's going to come and talk to us about the strategies for healing stress and anxiety. And I know many of us have done that. So if you would, just bow your head with me for just a moment. I would like to pray for two specific things this evening. One we don't normally do, but I think it's appropriate. We lost a valued member of our church today. Carol passed, and we are experiencing a big hole in our heart because this woman was a powerful person who gave everything that she had to this congregation forever. And she will be missed, and she will always be loved. So pray for her family, and that they may find peace. And secondly, I would like to pray for climate change, the Environmental Council. May you have as much success as our God will give to you. We need it in every way, and we pray for your integrity and the way you go forward. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.